in the context of nonlinear change or emergence. You can't see what's emerging next because that's the nature of emergence. It's got emergent properties that we can't predict from where we are now.
Right.
But I actually think now we are starting to see signals of what that new phase of humanity will be. And it's one that has consciousness as foundational and understands that interconnectedness, and experientially people are experiencing how they are connected to the world around them. We are in one of these nonlinear times. We're seeing an acceleration of the breakdown. We're also seeing an acceleration of the breakthrough.
Hi, and welcome back to Metaconscious Leaders, where today we reflect on how great leaders recognize that leadership is constantly evolving and lead at the bow wave of that evolution. In this mindset, the role of leaders at this frontier is to realize the next stage, embody it, master it, and then demonstrate it for others to follow. In these times of monumental change and challenge, the inquiry for the nature of that emergent leadership that meets this moment is becoming intense. And so our guest today is a perfect match for this topic. Peter Merry is one who works at this frontier of leadership consciousness and is showing how our evolution as leaders is consistent with the evolution of humanity and consciousness itself, and how in a time of mounting complexity, increasing our sensory perception beyond our pure cognitive ability is becoming an essential element of successful leadership. Peter is a futures thinker, systems innovator, and one of the early voices arguing that the leadership challenges we face today aren't just technical, they're developmental. He's the author of several books, including Leading from the Field, Why Work, and the book we're talking about today, Evolutionary Leadership, which was recently updated in a second edition that addresses our increasingly complex world. In addition, Peter has done many other things, including being a co-founder of and long-time contributor to Ubiquity University, founder of the Science and Consciousness Conference, and co-founder and CEO of Wyrd Technologies. So welcome, Peter, to Metaconscious Leaders. I'm delighted
Great.
that we finally made this meeting happen.
Thank you, Greg. And there's actually, it's so funny how things change so fast. It literally just the last week finished another book with a Brazilian colleague called Whole Performers. That's talking about the need to go beyond high performance into whole performance that integrates the kind of human intelligences and things, which we're launching in Brazil next month. So that fits very well with your introductory framing too.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a further evolution from evolutionary leaders.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
brilliant. So, Peter, you're clearly an entrepreneur. Having met you a few times and seen what you've done, it seems entrepreneurship is at your core. You're highly creative, and these strands runs through so many activities. Have you always been like this?
A good question. I guess at uni I was studying French and German, and I think what woke me up then was I was studying the French absurdists and their kind of critique of society, and I
Right.
think that was what kind of got me thinking. As you mean we can have an opinion about the kind of state of the world, and maybe it's not in the best shape, and there's ways we could do things differently. And so those kind of early years pushed me more into social change work and kind of environmental activism. So I'd always had that commitment to how do we make the world a better place. And then when I moved over here in the Netherlands at the beginning of in around 2000, that was when I got more into the kind of entrepreneurship and things. But I guess always been looking for creative ways to make a positive difference.
Right. And is there something that you feel is driving that, or is it? I mean, it may just be curiosity. I'm just wondering whether you feel, because some do,
Hmm.
an inner urge to be doing such things.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of deep sense of commitment to life beyond just human life on the planet, and as well as the kind of human, as it were, because I
Yeah.
think we have so much potential that we're not realizing, and that's being kind of stifled by the systems and the cultures around us. I always say, to find the be able to have the biggest possible positive impact with the least possible effort, not from a laziness perspective, but from an efficiency perspective. So where are like the leverage points or the acupuncture points that might have the biggest effect? So those are the things that seem to come my way. A lot of it is synchronicity, and I guess that kind of has grown over the last 10 years or so, being able to work consciously in that way. So I have gone through a phase of, I guess, being like driving really hard to try to make a difference, and then moving into more of a subtle relationship, I guess, with life
Right,
around me, and noticing that when you stop trying so hard, things tend to happen more
right.
gracefully.
And do you, so there's that piece of synchronicity, and I love that. Do you also, or do you ever sense that there's some guidance coming into that?
Yeah, yeah, but I guess in the way I experience it and the way I would interpret it, and it's not so much coming from another being or entity, it's just life, the way life works, which
Yeah,
is, if everything's deeply interconnected, then if we're connected to that interconnectedness, then the
right.
pieces that we need will kind of come our way. If we're just purely in the kind of rational mind, which by definition separates things and keeps us kind of focused here, and then we've just reduced our bandwidth. So we need to learn to open the bandwidth, and then we find that there's a lot more information and intelligence out there that connects to what we're doing. And when we kind of let go of the idea that we are the ones who have to come up with all the solutions ourselves and work out how we're going to implement it all by ourselves, but accept that there are, there's other information out there. There's scientists say we only understand, 4% of reality.
It's as
The
high
rest
as
they
that, is
call
it?
dark matter and dark energy, just because they don't really understand what it is to make up the equation. So, it doesn't make much sense just to base our understanding and decisions on 4% of what's out there. So when we expand our sensory system, as it were, then we start to access more of that information.
Yeah. Peter, can we talk about your book, Revolutionary Leaders, which I highly recommend, by the way, for leaders looking to evolve their leadership to a higher level of meaning, of purpose, effectiveness, or impact? Why
Mhm.
is it so relevant? Why now?
I was discovering the kind of world of Ken Wilber and integral thinking and spiral dynamics, understanding developmental psychology and how that plays out in society and organizations as
Yeah.
well. And it was, I think Otto Scharmer had written his very first paper on what became Theory U and things. So I was working with a small company I'd set up called Engage, and we were discovering all of that. And it was my own inquiry, really, which is so, I get all of this stuff. And we were doing the art of hosting, which is certain ways of, working with groups and things. And I was just wondering, like, okay, how does all of this influence the way we lead and the way we organize? What are the implications of it all? So that's when I wrote Evolutionary Leadership. Was actually, I was very pregnant with it because I just sat down for 10 days and meditated every morning, and then it just kind of flowed through. But I think its relevance is, I mean, we republished it because the original um, edition, well, the original publisher actually wasn't publishing anymore, so it was getting ridiculously expensive online. But I think it's also the times, because it's really exploring how a more integrated approach to leadership and organization can be relevant for our times, given the
Yeah.
complexity and the speed of change and everything else. It provides, a number of maps of the landscape as well as practices for ourselves as leaders that just help us to make sense more clearly of what's happening,
Yeah.
to be better informed, and therefore to design better interventions.
Yeah.
And includes, application stories from both government and business. Just given the challenges we're facing, I think it can be a very useful way of looking at the world and making better sense of it. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly agree. And so with the world, if we just take a step back, how do you characterize the changes that are happening now? How do you characterize the context of where we are as humanity on planet Earth?
Well, I mean, when I first wrote Evolutionary Leadership, I've got this kind of double S curve in it of the systems breaking down and systems breaking through in the context of nonlinear change or emergence or tipping points, as Malcolm Gladwell calls it. And, in the early 2000s, whenever I was giving talks about it all, I'd say, well, the nature of nonlinear change is that from where we are now, you can't see what's emerging next because that's the nature of emergence. It's got emergent properties that we can't predict from where we are now. But I actually think now for the last few years, we are maybe starting to see signals of what that new phase of humanity will be. And I think it's one that's has consciousness as foundational. and understands that interconnectedness, and experientially people are experiencing how they are connected to the world around them, and if they can kind of trust in that, and be aware of information that comes to them from other sources, then
Yeah.
we'll find we're actually able to solve a lot of the problems we're facing, and with a lot more speed and grace. Because there are practices already out there for how to work with organizations and pieces of land energetically. Like we have, and obviously in the healing side of things, there's a lot of that already around. We know you can grow food with less pesticides when you use energetic practices, and that food becomes, increases in vitality. So in many, many different sectors, there are
Yeah.
examples. And that's another book I haven't published yet, but is waiting to go, called The Pain and the Promise. That's kind of talking particularly about the content, in a way, of the transition. But yeah, I think we are in one of these nonlinear times. I think we're seeing an acceleration of the breakdown. We're also seeing an acceleration of the breakthrough.
Yeah.
And I think it's just starting to become visible.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that I have a picture of what it is, but I think, like you, I'm starting to recognize elements which are emerging, which will form part of whatever the bigger picture is.
Yeah.
And I certainly think that almost philosophical reference you made there to consciousness being fundamental rather than this being a physical universe, which is our current cultural
Yeah.
paradigm, um, is fundamental to that, to all of those changes happening.
Yeah. I'd say, as well as it being a physical universe, I guess, because
Oh,
I think we
yes.
yeah,
Fundamentally,
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 yeah. Yeah.
fundamentally, is what
It's
I was
like there's
meaning
two
there.
different dimensions, like our friend Jude Currivan would say. There's the kind of materialist world that follows Newtonian laws, but that's only part of the picture. And then there is the informational world that
Yeah,
follows kind of quantum laws, and they don't, and they're interfacing the whole time. This was my PhD in, which led to the book Evolution Theory, was the whole thing is one interconnected system of information that's basically always flowing in an exchange between gross material information that we can see around us. That's the
yeah,
nature of it, being that information carried on energy waves that lock in, let's say, as standing waves. And that's when it comes into our normal senses, that we can see and touch stuff. But,
yeah,
any physical thing around us is really mostly space when you look
yeah,
at it under a
yeah,
microscope. So it's a bit of an illusion, the whole physical side of it. But the point is that it's all information,
yeah,
and that there is just more or less subtlety in the information that we're looking at. And as we expand our senses, we get to access more of that information field. But it operates, the rules are different when it's outside of the material information, as it were. When it gets into the subtle information, then we experience it as non-linear and
right,
non-causal, and is not limited to physical space. All those kind of things that one finds in consciousness research. And it's not contradictory in the way I make sense of it with evolution, because everything is spinning like a toroidal kind of system, as I attempt to depict in a 2D form on the front of the book. But it's all
okay,
spinning. It's flowing the whole time between causal levels, subtle levels, and gross manifest levels. And
right,
funnily enough, I just came across this English Renaissance guy, Robert Flood, from the 1600s, who's wrote a lot about microcosm and macrocosm, and he has this very concept in there already, which he called the monochord. He sees the universe as like one chord, and then he has the hand of God at the top, kind of tuning this
yeah,
chord, but going
yeah,
through the whole thing, moving through these different levels of manifestation of reality, we
right,
could say. Before then, that was just before the world then tipped into the very materialist kind of worldview that emerged with the Enlightenment and everything.
yeah.
But
And
yeah,
it's not that the materialist view is wrong in itself, but
partial.
it's not fundamental.
It's partial. It's partial. It
It's
describes
partial.
part of reality.
That's right. We've forgotten about the rest. We've trivialized it.
Yeah, I think that happened, when we separated church from science, as it
Yeah,
were, because that was the church at that point was the domain of the inner worlds, and we threw the baby out with the bathwater. So we may have disagreed with the church institution and the story, as it were, but then anybody who had anything to do with, suggesting that we had an inner world and we could influence the reality around us, like the witches or whatever, were rapidly disposed of. And I think that's the big trauma we have collectively. We need to reintegrate now the inner worlds in a way that isn't, I think the whole spiritual movement and the Eastern practices that have come over, like yoga and the meditation practices and things, have really helped. But we need to get beyond kind of woo woo spirituality, because
Yeah.
that's putting a lot of people off. And we can do that now because we have the science that shows that indeed our inner state affects the world around us,
Right.
and that there is something that connects all of us up. So I think we are moving in that direction faster now than we have been before.
Very
Yeah.
rapidly, I think. And it's something I particularly like about your book, which is that there are clear models, and they show what's going on kind of beneath the surface in ourselves, in organizations, in society, in humanity. And indeed, I saw that Professor Lazio had said of the book, which I thought summarized it quite well, in terms of what I saw in it, is it's
Mm.
a great synthesis of leading thinkers like Wilbur, Beck, and Cohen, but that you take it to a practical level for the individual as well as for the organizations, and combine theory with practice in one. And
Mm.
that's why and in that way, going to what you were saying a moment ago, the thing here is how do we take some of these sort of sometimes esoteric ideas and ground them in reality, and ground them in actually what does it mean in practice right now going
Yeah.
forward, and in this context, in metaconscious leaders within business. So can we
Mm.
can we look at some of the strands, and in particular, the one that stands out for me is I think it's the spiral dynamic model,
Mm.
which seems to me to show leadership evolving almost in lockstep with human development. It's like as
Yeah.
humanity. Will you talk us through that? Speak a bit about that and its relevance and applicability back into leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, there's many models in the world of developmental psychology, and in fact, in Ken Wilber's book Integral Psychology, if you look at the back of it, there's like he lists all these different models, but he basically says it's one mountain and they're different paths, like leading up to the same place. So people have developed different language, but
Yeah,
the plateaus are essentially the same.
yeah,
And underlying that, is a fundamental observation, I guess, that humanity develops through certain stages, and the general directionality is increasing complexity. So we're able to embrace more of reality as we evolve. And Wilber kind of summarized it as saying you go from egocentric, where you're just taking in, yourself into account, to ethnocentric, where you're taking you identify with a small in group, as it were, but then as opposed to an out group. So there is this us, we're right, and the other's wrong, as it were.
yeah,
And then up to a world centric, you would say, where we start to identify with all of humanity. And then ultimately, potentially up to cosmocentric, where we identify with the life and consciousness as a whole across the universe, you could say, where humanity is one part of it. And spiral dynamics is one of those maps. And I found it particularly useful because, like you were saying, of its practical applicability. It came out of research done by a gentleman called Claire Graves a while ago now. And his quest was to try to identify what makes up a healthy human being. That was his question. Then he realized that different people had different perceptions of what that was, what a healthy human being was. And he found it mapped into these kind of stages, as it were, and that it was
right,
indeed developmental, that people seem to move from one worldview to the next worldview.
okay,
And within that, many people are probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, with the kind of the pyramid, as it were. And he lived around the same time as Claire Graves. And they had quite a lot of discussion. And Claire Graves's point was that it's not closed like a pyramid. It's actually an open-ended system, because
right,
every time we develop a new value system, a new way of seeing the world, we actually create the next set of problems that form the foundation for the next level of value system that has to solve them. So it just keeps going.
yeah.
And at the end of his life, apparently Maslow agreed with Claire Graves that it was indeed an open-ended dynamic system. So
Is
the
that where he brought in transcendence?
yeah. I mean, transcendence for Maslow was just kind of, in a way, that's more about the process of things going. But the form
Okay,
of the pyramid suggests a
yeah,
closed like
yeah, yeah,
end, whereas the spiral, in the way that Don Beck and Chris Cowan, who then took Graves's ideas and really wanted to put them into practice and created these color codes to describe 8 core value systems.
Yeah.
It's like a spiral that does this because each new level transcends but includes the previous one in
Okay.
healthy development, reintegrates it. And just very briefly, I mean, the main stages are survival, which are recognized from Maslow, which they gave the color beige. And they say after survival comes a tribal, which they said is purple, which is more the ethnocentric, where we connect to a small group. We have a sense of safety and belonging. And both
Yeah.
those systems are pre-rational. So that, you can track it
Interesting.
both from a baby in the moment they're born, but it
Uh,
also reflects the journey of humanity over time. So when we were
uh,
hunter-gatherers in beige, to when we lived in more tribal societies in purple in the second level. But
uh,
we go through that very same journey like we do in the womb. Like we go through the evolution of the physical human being, over millions of years in the womb itself. And
yeah.
when we emerge, we actually go through the same journey that humanity has been through over thousands of years
Yeah.
in its worldviews. And
Right.
so you have this kind of survival and then this tribal. And then we move into the stage where we have the first sense of separate self. So for a child, this is for 2 to 3. When they say me for the first time, they realize there's me and another.
Yeah.
And so we had that when we moved into feudal empires as humanity. And that's a key moment because if you think, remember that we are the earth, right? So we are an expression of the earth. So this was the first time that the earth had attempted an experiment to be able to be aware of itself.
Yeah.
So when humanity created that sense of self, when the earth created that sense of self through humanity, we were able to see an other and develop a third person perspective. That was a major evolution for the consciousness of the planet.
Yeah.
Um, the challenge is, like in a healthy development, you can differentiate from the previous stage of development because you need to create some distance to be able to take the next step. But what you then have to do is wrap the past back in, or else you get a trauma, right? And you split off a part of yourself.
Right. Okay.
So Wilbur would say the difference is between differentiation and oh, I had the word and it's just gone, but basically a disassociation.
Yeah.
So if you then kind of push away the past, then it goes into the shadow lands, as it were, and it'll continue to pull at you and sabotage you until you reintegrate it. So this is
Yeah.
classic kind of developmental psychology stuff. So you get the red they call the power self, power driven self, that's all about trying to control the world around it, sees the world as a jungle. You still see it in street gangs, in healthy expressions, in sports. And it's really again, it's not a rational system. It doesn't think, it acts with power to make things
Yeah.
happen. Now that in our developmental history was the feudal empires and the kind of the lords and the chiefs who were all fighting each other. There wasn't a nation state yet. What emerged next was a system that attempted to create some order out of all of the chaos that was creating. So that
Yeah.
was when the nation state emerged, the religions emerged, all of which created strong hierarchical systems that were designed to create a container, as it were, to channel that kind of raw power energy when we suddenly realize, wow, I'm an individual, I have my own self, and I can affect the world around me. So that's what they call the blue system. That requires order and structure. So we still
Yeah.
recognize that in a lot of governmental systems, in a lot of religious systems. So all the different religions all had their own cultural story, but they basically all landed in this container of a kind of blue, order-driven hierarchical system. So the next impulse, and what you may notice is that it's swinging from these warm colors, so from beige and red, and then you got purple and blue, which are cool colors. They're the we-driven colors. So you can almost see the yin and the yang in the dynamic, where it's first an
Okay.
expression of the individual. It
Yeah.
then requires an expression of the collective, and then it's again that becomes too suffocating. So the individual needs to express themselves, yeah.
Yeah.
And then that becomes too chaotic. So the we needs to reinforce itself. So you get this kind of dance between the I and the we systems. And so what
Right.
happens after the blue, which was a heavy kind of controlling we system, is you get again the I wanting to express itself, and that's what they call the achiever self. And so that is the emergence of in the Enlightenment, that was all about, I'm not going to listen to the priest and take it on faith anymore when I can look through a telescope or a microscope and discover reality for myself. So where is your God? When I look through a microscope or a telescope, he's not there. So what happens is that's the explosion of science and rationality that doesn't believe in faith anymore. and goes to just try to work out for itself, okay, what are things like the emergence of science? In ourselves, that's this desire to not just follow the rules anymore,
Yeah.
but within that set of rules to go and be the best that we can. That's the
Yeah.
kind of human potential, go
Yeah.
out there, and it's the American dream, the self-made person. You can go out there and find it out yourself. And in that context, we had the Industrial Revolution drop in and the
Right.
birth of free market economics. So that value system is at the core of our current kind of global economic system. And
Right.
in that context emerged the high performer, which I'll come to in a minute. Right.
Okay.
And this was the you can be the best, like drive, more, get more money, more houses, more whatever. So this is the strong I drive again.
Yeah.
Of course, what nature does then, because it's then gone to the yang, is it swings back to the yin, and we get this kind of, this is feeling a little lonely. There must be more to life than just another car, another yacht, or more money, whatever. And we discover the inner worlds. And so that's the
Yeah.
sensitive self. That's where the emotional intelligence comes in.
Okay.
We start to care more about other people and what they believe, and integrating all this diversity of people and creating harmony and caring about nature. It becomes an intrinsic expression of that, which we would see in, a lot of the NGO movements and the kind of social movements that are saying it's not just about the money. It's not just about more and more and more. We have to look at kind of more quality of life.
Yeah.
And those 6 value systems is what Claire Groves called the first tier value systems, because what he noticed is the next one, which he called the integral system, which they gave the yellow color to, was the first value system that was able to see all the others and not be attached to its own lens. So all of the other value systems are really very focused on their own value system and interpreting the world that way, and have, don't like the other ones, basically. Yellow is there's a moment where we become less attached to our sense of identity, our sense of who we are, that we're able to see, okay, well, there's all these different pieces. It's not about right or wrong. It's about how we integrate them all to solve the major challenges that we're facing. So this is green brings, the world-centric moves into this awareness of, wow, we're facing these challenges. We need to get beyond all the bickering and the rights and wrongs and differences, and integrate, solve these problems as quickly and effectively as we can.
Sounds to me like meta-conscious.
Yes, so there you go. Yeah, so that's the kind of yellow value system, and I'll come back to that in a sec, just to wrap it up and not say too much about it. But the next one that emerges is again a we, and this is the 8th in the system that I suggest in evolution theory is the kind of final note in the octave, as it were, that wraps the whole system together.
Yeah.
It's where it understands or experiences reality as a kind of web of interconnected energy, basically, and gets beyond the rational intelligence and realizes there are other forms of knowing. We can ground ourselves in consciousness, essentially, in the field, and then things start to, work in a very different way.
Yeah.
But in terms of leadership and organization, and this project I'm working on in Brazil, this book we just finished called Whole Performers, the point we're making with Spiral Dynamics in the background is that to deal with the complexity that we're facing in the world right now and the problems that we're facing, but 2, to also recognize what the young people coming up are thinking and feeling and their worldview, which is beyond this orange achiever self, right? They're refusing to go into organizations that are just purely achiever driven and are just like, we're going to exploit our work, our human resources as much as we can to build as much value for ourselves. So they don't even have a stake in it. And go through this whole experience of a very imbalanced life where you have to leave most of yourself in the car when you walk into the workplace, and it's just your rational intelligence, that counts. That when we integrate the green, the sensitive self piece, we bring online the emotional intelligence, the human intelligences, and you start to integrate some of the intuitive intelligences as well. Then you actually find people become more effective. So they actually perform better than the high performers because they're using a lot more intelligences, and they don't burn themselves out in the process.
Right.
But that requires a completely different culture in the organization. So you're not complete integrity and transparency of the organization. If you're just greenwashing these people, they'll see it straight away and they'll just go somewhere else. They'll either look for another organization or they'll create a startup or whatever. They'll do their own thing, but they're not interested in working for the old system. as it were, that's purely in
Right.
it for profit and that's not trying to make a positive impact in the world. So the case we're making is this is what we're calling whole performers. So to move from high performers to whole performers is whole performers rooted in the integral value system, who have integrated a lot of the human side of things as well, but are also interested in making an impact and making an effect. They're not just in it for the harmony side of things, but they want to really make a positive difference. That is both a whole generation that's coming up now, and if organizations want the best
Yeah.
talent, they're going to have to make themselves attractive to the whole
Yeah.
performers. But they're also the people we need to run our businesses and our organizations today, because they're the ones who've got the capacities to deal with the complexity and be far more effective in dealing with it than a pure kind of drive to be the best, which is what the high performer kind of thing brings in. So yeah, it's a very, very useful lens, I'd say. And we always have to remember that the map's not the landscape.
Yeah.
And the theory, isn't, and it's not about typologies. These are ways of dealing with reality that light up and dim down in us depending on the life conditions. So it's life at work. As life conditions change, then we develop new intelligences to be able to deal with it, to be able to cope with it. Or we
Yeah.
don't, in which case we burn out,
Yeah.
or the system crashes or whatever. But it's life saying this is survival of the fittest, not in sense of physical fitness, but of how well we fit with the ecology of the world around us, and developing these capacities that that enable us to deal with more complexity
Yeah.
is
So,
really, I think, what's going on right now.
so what are the characteristics of this elevated form of leadership that you notice?
Well, I mean, one of the keys, as I said, is a lack of attachment to needing to be affirmed in your own identity.
Okay.
So there's a lot. I guess an underlying that would be some kind of spiritual practice that enables you to take some distance from who you are and being
Yeah.
attached to the things that you need other people to say about you.
Yeah.
So you're interested in achieving a positive impact, and you see yourself as an instrument in that.
Okay.
And it doesn't really matter. You want to be as effective as you can in that.
Yeah.
And you're not into it. You're not in it for your own promotion. You're not in it for the praise. You're in it. It's really a spirit of service. So kind of building on servant, but servant leadership came really very much out of the green kind of value system, the more
Yeah.
harmonious. This is that, but very focused on wanting to make a difference. It's very good at dealing with conflict,
Yep.
not getting caught up in the conflict,
Yep.
being able to hold it in such a way that it kind of starts to resolve itself.
Yep.
When you don't collapse the wave, as it were, into a particle too quickly, but you keep it open, then
Yeah.
intelligence comes in that enables these conflicts to resolve themselves. It understands diversity and can work with diversity in different ways because it's not triggered by its own past or its own value systems.
Right.
It understands we need all these different value systems to play a role. Neither of them has the full answer, but each has part, and it has this way of being able to work with people that makes them feel seen and then realize that they're not the whole solution. They need to work with others. So it's able to hold an overarching goal or purpose. And as it pushes into the turquoise, into the holistic, it learns to work more gracefully, I'd say, with the kind of other intelligences, generally creates a lot of synchronicities, and has a quality of presence that just allows things to be the way they are without judgment. So it's non-judgmental.
And with this is also sounding more right brain rather than left brain. It's more holistic rather than divisional and focused and on one particular metric.
It's the integration of the two. This is the thing.
Understood. Yes.
It's like when it knows when to use which intelligence.
Yes.
That's the key, I think, when you get to these kind of integral, the whole performer. They're able to activate whatever is needed in each moment.
Yeah.
And so people don't feel judged. And it's like, sometimes you need that very kind of linear, rational mind, to sort for certain jobs. Other moments you need the more human connection, and other moments you need the more intuitive kind of field intelligence. But it's like a full spectrum. They have access to the full spectrum of intelligences, know when to use them and bring them in the context of the positive difference that they're trying to make. So that's always there as the higher purpose, as it were. And it's like playing many different instruments, as they know how to kind of make the band work, as it were,
Yeah.
and bring
The or
together all the different players.
the conductor.
Yeah, yeah, you're the conductor as well, but you
Yeah.
also model integrity. These leaders,
Yeah.
they're not defensive or aggressive in any way. They're open and curious.
Yeah.
There's very little ego in the picture.
Yeah. Do you feel that we're seeing that shift in leadership consciousness now? And if so, does it have any generational differences? I mean, you did mention the younger generations coming up. Do you notice what change is happening and where in particular?
Yeah, I do think it's definitely emerging, and I think it's taken form more outside the main organizations, the big organizations in the first phase. So this is the birth
Okay.
of the startup of kind of impact entrepreneurship. I
Right.
think a lot of these people who are creating their own organizations to make a positive difference have that value
Yes.
system
Okay. Get
embedded.
that.
And
Yeah.
so therefore they try to run their organizations that way as well.
Yeah.
And I do think there is definitely, I mean, developmental psychology, I think the younger generations, they move through the stages a lot
Yes.
easier than the older generations. It's
I've noticed
um,
that.
like these kind of pathways, neural pathways,
Yeah.
or you could even think, I often think of it as like a path through the forest.
Yeah.
The generation that reaches the edge has to kind of hack their way through, and then the next generation comes along, the path's already there. So, Ken Wilber would call them cosmic grooves.
Yeah.
They're grooves that we've made through a way of thinking that makes it easier for others to connect to them. So I think there is definitely a generational thing, and this is part of what we're trying to do with whole performers is help bigger organizations see that, first of all, understand these people and the value system and why it's important for the world and why it would actually help their organization, but also
Yeah.
help them realize that they're going to have to change their leadership style, change their culture, change their reward systems to be able to attract these people. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do think it's coming. Yeah.
I I notice with my own children that I watch them doing what they're doing, and I can't help but be amused that I see them going through stages that I went through. But what
Mm.
took me 10 or 15 years takes them about 3 months.
Right. Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I can just watch them going through they're almost forms of identification
Mm.
in a way
Yeah.
of,
Yeah, they
this
are.
is important. Oh, no, that's not important. This is important. Oh, no, that's not
Yeah.
important. This is important.
Yeah.
And it's just lovely to see it happening so swiftly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wyrd Technologies. Let's talk about your
Mm.
business, Wyrd Technologies. Now, I think this is fascinating because it's bringing the science to the piece, but also the technology that's able to measure what was previously unmeasurable and therefore
Mm.
discounted by a large number of people as being, people who are subscribed to the idea that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist or and it's not of value.
Mm.
Now, you set up the business or you co-founded the company, Wyrd Technologies. Can we start with why the name? Because it's a bit of a
Mm.
weird name, isn't it?
Yeah, weird with a Y, which is important. So, weird with a Y. It was the original. Actually, I found this through a book by Brian Bates called The Way of Weird. He was a Sussex researcher,
Right.
and he found a document in the British Library that was written by one of the early monks in the British Isles, who was sent out by his boss, as it were, to go and find out what these pagans were doing in terms of this magic stuff. And of course, the Anglo-Saxon sorcerer knew this guy was coming through his intuition and prepared a whole initiation rite for him to become a sorcerer. So this monk got this initiation rite in Anglo-Saxon sorcery and then went back to the monastery and wrote it all down.
Right.
And in that document, which is still in the British Library, he uses the word weird with a Y to describe the dimension that the sorcerer goes into to heal people, to get a peek into the future, all those kind of things. The shift of
Right.
state really into a more subtle consciousness,
Right.
which nowadays we might, call, we talk a lot about shamans. We've had to import a lot of the language and the concepts from other cultures, like the
Yeah.
East or the South American cultures, or out in the far east of Europe, where those languages still existed, whereas we buried them very deep in the West when the church came in, and then when the kind of materialist worldview came in.
Yeah.
So we wanted to reclaim that word. Of course, it got corrupted to mean strange,
Yeah.
and the spelling was changed to EI instead of the Y. But it's actually the root of the German word werden, which means to become. So it's literally
Right.
in the language describing how things, it also means to spin, which fits very well with evolution,
Yeah.
is how things spin out of the subtle fields into the manifest
Right.
world. So, I mean, it's a very
So
powerful world.
the manifest world being a reflection of, in a way, or an expression of the unmanifest, which is,
Yes, an expression. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So, like David Bohm's, implicit and explicit order.
yeah,
So, the explicit, the visible, and the implicit, what's in the information field, but not yet visible, as it were,
yeah,
to our normal senses.
yeah,
That the weird is really describing that interconnected web that generates all
yeah.
life. And so
Okay.
we wanted to reclaim that and try to tell the story of, we have our own Northwest European indigenous tradition.
Yeah,
It's great that we've been able to access the Eastern language and the yin and the yang, but we have fire and frost. We have the same kind of
yes,
story that's just been buried. So yeah, that's why Wyrd, and because of course what we were working with was consciousness, and what still is and is
yeah.
that dimension. Yeah.
So there are two products now that you've developed. They grew out of one or two other projects. Which could you give a quick sort of
Mm,
background to? So there's PEAR, the Princeton
mm,
Engineering Anomalies Research, and the
that's right.
Global Consciousness Project. This is where your work was kind of grew out of. Is that right?
Yeah. So
Could you give a quick background of those, and then let's talk about your technologies?
yeah, so the Princeton work was like late 1970s when a McDonnell Aircraft Company came to the School of Engineering at Princeton and said it seems like the fighter pilots, when they get stressed, are influencing the instruments on the dashboard of the fighter aircraft. Can you please find out what's going on, because
Right.
it doesn't fit any of our models. And so that
Yeah.
started the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. Anomalies because they just didn't fit anywhere. And Professor Robert Jahn was the dean of the School of Engineering, and he kind of took it on. And he brought in very quickly a psychologist called Brenda Dunn,
Okay.
because it was all about the human interaction with technology.
Yeah.
And they started with some mechanical devices. They built a very big random mechanical cascade that looks a bit like this, but is like
Okay.
3-4 meters tall, and is on a wall and has 9,000 balls that cascade over these pegs. So
Yeah.
just like this does, but a lot more slowly and with a lot more noise. And
Right.
you get a kind of random distribution curve at the bottom. And they would have people sit in front of it and attempt to make more balls move to the right or left, basically just with their
Okay.
intention.
Yeah.
And found that people were able to do that, not people with psychic skills, just normal folks off the streets. And
Right.
they created various other physical interfaces like a pendulum and a fountain that people tried to influence, and had the same kind of results.
Okay.
And then they developed a digital technology based on a random number generator. And that is a quantum process for generating ones and zeros really fast in a
Yeah.
way that just can't be predicted,
Yeah.
and which materialist science has no explanation for how anything should be able to influence these random number generators. Nothing
Right.
electromagnetic, nothing. And yet, when they sat people in front of a screen that had a line running across the middle connected to a random event generator, people would try to make the line move up or down the screen, which is equivalent to more ones or more zeros. People were
Yeah.
able to do it in the same way they were able to influence the balls
Yeah.
in the mechanical devices. And of course, they had to publish stuff because they were the Princeton School of Engineering. And the scientific world, of course, kept pushing back. Can't be right. This can't be true. There must be something wrong with the experiment, whatever, whatever. So they had to keep, refining the protocol. And they kept doing this over a period of 28 years. And in 2007, they closed the lab because Robert Jahn was retiring, and all the equipment went into storage. But if you do a kind of meta study of all of the published data, then it's nearly 1 in 1 billion that what they found was chance in terms. So they
Right.
basically demonstrated that our inner state affects the world around us. And I got to know Brenda because they spun off a little company called Sileron that built a first lamp that responded to your intention. And they had the random event generator you could buy and have the software and share your findings and stuff like that. So I was playing with that for a while and
Yeah.
taking it to events to see, whether you saw anything in the data when people had a certain experience in the event. And I was getting some, quite interesting stuff and sharing it. Anyway, about 6 years ago, Brenda and I were talking, and she said, "We've got all this stuff in storage here in Princeton. It's costing us, money. It's just doing nothing. Can you do anything with it?" And I just met this couple in Yorkshire, in the north of England, who had a large 2,500 acre estate. and was helping them turn it into a place as a transformational retreat center. And I just got this picture of all the Princeton stuff in a space there, with the public being able to come in and interact with it from the kind of mission of reminding them of our interconnectedness.
Yeah.
That was the conclusion I'd drawn, is that we're in the mess we're in because we've forgotten the nature of our interconnectedness.
Yeah.
And yet, if you experience yourself influencing this technology and there's nothing connecting you to the technology, it does something with your kind of way of seeing yourself in the world, because nobody
Yeah.
has told you how that could be possible.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. So we established Wyrd Experience. It's still there and has all the technology from Princeton in it. A couple of pieces still need repair. So if anyone's interested in supporting that, please let me know. And then we further developed the technology. So Brenda introduced me to a scientist, Wolf Argianu, who had discovered that if you had two of these REGs next to each other in a room and people were having a strong experience together, you saw correlations between the two random data streams.
Right.
And that was allowing him to read a lot more of the events that were going on than the single REG tech that had come out of the Princeton work.
And that's also happening in the Global Consciousness Project as well, is it?
Yeah, so the Global Consciousness Project so Roger Nelson was part of the original PEAR team, the Princeton team, and they took the single REG tech and then spread it around the world, as it were, to see if, when there were global events, whether you saw all the REGs respond at the same time.
Right.
And and that's still going. They've grown the network now and developed a new device. So there's some debate around it in terms of how connected it is to, independently to what's actually happening in the world, or how driven it is by the experimenter behind it. But that's anyway, that's a big rabbit hole. But yeah, that's still going. And the classic one is 9/11. Just a couple of minutes before the planes hit the Twin Towers, you saw a peak in the data. So it suggests that something shows up in the field before it actually manifests, which would make sense.
Right.
So so
Okay.
we developed this. The first thing he did did research on a tantra ritual. They had the same ritual that they did over 10 years in Berlin, and found that you saw very clearly in the data the start of the ritual, end of the ritual, the key moments in the ritual. And then with colleagues in the Oregano research group, they were looking at the moment of death, moment of dying, and they found that the moment of death, you also see structure in the data. So remember, the machine's not connected to anybody. I mean, this is what we built, which is the Wyrdoscope, as we call it. And this has two random event generators and a Raspberry Pi in it. It just sits Raspberry Pi,
what is the Raspberry Pi?
Microcomputer.
Okay.
And battery, so it can stand alone, and but it just sits in the room, basically tracking the field, is what you could say, tracking the system of entanglement that's going on at that point. And what you see is structures in the data that correlate to people's experience in the room. So when they have a strong experience together, you see structure come into the random data, patterns come into the random data that, have probability scores of 1 in the thousands, basically. So that, and then what we did, a number of institutions work with this now, including Monroe Institute, but also universities. So Harvard Medical School took it to an event with Sadhguru last year. And the moment that Sadhguru comes into the room, you see a big peak in the data, literally to the second. And interestingly enough, we also had a stack of the Global Consciousness Project technology there as well. And we just finished a study to see if we applied our algorithm to the GCP data, whether we'd see the same patterns. And indeed we did. So, that's affirmation that something was going on in the field, that these two separate pieces of technology were picking up in the same way.
Now, you said there that in the moment Sadhguru came in, there was a peak, or there was a coherence. Yet earlier on you said 9/11, it was in the moments before the planes hit the tower that the peak occurred, which seems more around prediction rather than moment of impact. Does it vary?
It does, but you'd see a curve. It's a kind of peak that would do this. So you'd see it starting to build before it actually
Okay, all right.
clicks. And there is a starting point of the data as well that is often interesting to look at, that happens before.
So, this reminds me of a Belbin team game that I use with groups when doing team development, where there's a pen which is suspended over a piece of paper. There are 4 strings at the top of it, and there are 4 strings at the bottom of it. And there are 8 people standing around the framework, and each holding 1 string. So the
Mm,
pen is operated by 8 operators who all have to pull their strings. So to draw anything on the paper, those 8 people have to
mm,
operate as one. Now, to begin with, when people get around, there's a lot of you can just see it. There's a lot of telling. There's a lot of chatting. There's a lot of, well, who's going to lead this, and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't work very well. But then things start to happen, and there appears to be a moment when everything clicks. The
mm,
talking seems to go quiet. Things just happen and they work as one. It's almost as if they move into a different state, a state
mm,
of oneness rather than a state of 8 individuals trying to operate together, but as separate entities.
mm.
If there was a weirder scope there at that moment, is that the sort of thing that it would pick up?
Yeah, that's what you would expect because it's about what it's really tracking is the kind of entanglement within a system.
Right.
So if people are somewhere working together with a shared purpose and they click in like you described, more that they're not just discussing it rationally, but there's more of a felt sense of connection.
Yeah.
That's when you tend to see high levels of entanglement. And when you see structure in the data, but that's also when you see the synchronicities and the kind of insights download and the magic happen really in those kind of moments. So yeah, that's what I would expect to see in the data. Yeah.
Right.
We also have the Wyrd Light, that I really wanted so that people could have something in their living rooms or in these kind of moments. Because the brighter the light gets, we correlated the brightness of the light with the anomaly in the data. So you could say the more coherent the field is, the more entangled the system is, the brighter the light gets. So it's like a feedback device. So the weirdoscope, you can pull the data
So
off and look at it. But this actually gives you feedback in the moment
So
about
Peter,
your coherence and
if there
connection.
was a meeting, and you've got a number of people in there. So the meeting's going on, everybody comes in, everybody seems kind of normal. Is the light on or off or what?
It would probably be like on dim when
And
they
dim.
first come
Okay.
in,
So
and then
what would happen? What would happen if the people started arguing, and what would happen if people suddenly got into some very creative state where they were
mm,
pinging off each other and having insights and really gelling and coming up with creative outcomes and solutions.
yeah, I mean on that the latter where you would expect it to go brighter
Yeah.
because it's suggesting that there's more connection coherence.
Yeah.
In the argument one is an interesting one because if it's very fragmented, then you wouldn't see much on the light. But we've just done some research, which we don't have the results of yet, but we just collected the data working with 20 actors in Amsterdam with a specific approach for activating emotions
Yeah.
to see whether we can see structures of emotions in the data. Because at the moment, the only thing people have measured with this technology is the size of effect. So
Right.
what's the deviation from randomness, basically?
Right.
But with having the two REGs and looking at the correlations between the two random data streams, we think we're starting to see patterns that reflect qualities within the field, such as states of consciousness or emotions. So we'll probably know after the summer conclusively whether we've actually found anything there. But that will tell us, like, do you see structure in the data as much, with joy, for example, as with fear or anger?
Right.
Or is it so, if you're just measuring volume, as it were, or size of effect, you may
Yeah.
still get that with anger and fear if everybody is fearful or angry together,
Yeah.
as it were.
Yeah.
But we're not sure. And
Yeah.
so we'll see that, and we might even then be able to distinguish between these qualities within the data, which
Yeah.
means we'd be able to give people feedback on the kind of
Yeah.
quality in the field.
So is it right to sort of summarize it as being the work that's been done thus far is conclusive in that it shows there is a field there, but
It shows,
the
yeah,
interpretation of the data is still got some nuances which we're trying to figure out.
I'd say it shows that our inner state affects random data. That's kind of
Right.
that's what the Princeton research proved.
Yeah.
That's what our research is showing. The reason I hesitated around field is because we're starting to kind of the best model we found that explains what this is something called the model of pragmatic information that
Okay.
came from Walter van Lukadu in Freiburg in Germany. It was derived from generalized quantum theory.
Okay.
And the way he describes it is more as entangled systems.
Right.
And they might create fields, but it's about the organizational closure, as he calls it, the boundary of the system that you
Right.
have with each other. And that boundary can be non-local.
Yeah.
So you can entangle, you can be on a Zoom call together in different places around the world and have the Wyrd scope connected to it or the light and see it respond. So we had 250 druids on a call with the chief druid, and we were chatting first, and the light was flickering from different colors, and then he did this ritual to create a field for all of the druids to come into.
Yeah.
And the light then locked into green, and it stayed green for 45 minutes. And then when he
Right.
dissolved the field, it went back to kind of flickering
Yeah.
different colors. So
Uh,
that's an organizational closure right there. Ritual created the entanglement in the system, and that's what then shows structure in the data.
And have you experimented with it in business situations?
I personally haven't explicitly. We have used it in meetings and things, and you can see like often key moments it
Yeah.
responds. But we do have a couple of consultants who have got a weirder scope and a light and are currently experimenting with it in those
Right.
contexts.
Are you looking for any
Sure,
experiment?
if people want to, it would be great to see, because I think there's a whole spin-off. There's a whole
Right.
spin-off industries around it in terms of
Mm.
coaching people, and then but you've got the feedback now,
Yeah.
like how a team can become more coherent, and then
Yeah.
trying out different practices, and then
Yeah.
seeing not just from your own experience and your own intersubjective experience, but also from the data, from did that
Yeah.
seem to have an effect
Yeah.
in the field or not. So I think the technology is going to enable a whole other industry around, facilitating groups and teams for consciousness alignment, as it were, or consciousness coherence, or however we want to frame it. People will
Right.
find their language, I think.
Yeah. And that's where you're kind of taking it. That's your vision, is it, for the use and application of the technology in the future?
I think many, many different contexts. We've just finished building a server that can stream the data to the back end of websites and games. So integrating it into games where, if you're playing a game that your inner state affects your performance in the game or the
Yeah.
quality of the spell that you cast,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. We want to build a toy. So one of the things we have that was at the PEAR Lab was a little robot that scuttles around the table and in a random pattern, and people can pull it towards them or push it away from them with their intention. The
Right.
kids are very good at it because they don't have the limiting belief that it might not be possible. And so we want to build a toy like that. It's kind of a little hedgehog that will move around the table, and kids use their Jedi powers, as
So
it were, to
you
play with
said
it.
there, Peter, that they are very good at it. Have you done it with kids?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so we've had them both in front of the traditional pair data collection thing, and we've had them with the
Right. Okay. But
toys and
but you
other
haven't
things.
yet created the hedgehog that will move around
No.
in front
Well,
of
we
it.
have
Yeah.
we have the robot that came from Princeton that has a little frog, kind of toy frog sitting on top of it, and we've
Okay.
had kids playing with that. We also have this thing called Wyrd Wednesdays up at Wyrd Experience in Broughton in Yorkshire, and kids sometimes come to that, and they're good at things like mind sight, so blindfolded, being able to pick out different color pegs and things.
Right.
Or the Xena
Right.
cards, the classic experiments where someone's holding a card that has a shape on, and you kind of try to
Yeah.
intuit what shape that is. So I think this
Right.
whole domain of both on the one hand, there's the size skills, you could say, of remote viewing, of telepathy, and of psychokinesis, being able to bend spoons and things like that, which are interesting because of what they tell us about the nature of reality. But all of the spiritual traditions, they might call those siddhis, which are the skills that you can develop. So it's not so much about the
Spiritual powers.
siddhis or the skills, spiritual powers, but it's actually about the place of being that you come from
Yeah.
that makes those possible. And so
Yeah.
that's the bit I want to be pointing more towards, is when we're able to get ourselves into a certain place and into a certain state, then the magic happens naturally.
Yeah.
So one of the books I wrote, Leading from the Field, for example, has 12 principles for anyone who's leading an organization that would help them work consciously with the field of the system that they're leading.
Right.
And it's those kind of things, but fundamentally it's about, our own inner work that enables us to be more aligned with the kind of impulse of life or the natural intelligence or the cosmos or
Right.
God, if you were religious, or however you want to frame it,
Yeah.
that will enable us to create the kind of solutions that are needed and create them in a way that honors as much of life as possible. And also involves a lot less stress because we're not the ones who have to think it up, right?
I, and so it's a state which is less ego separate, survival oriented, and more integrated, whole, connected
Yeah.
with the system that we're part of, or the
Yeah. And
reality that we're
presence,
part
a
of.
lot of it, I think you can
Presence
often
is
say
about it.
it's related
Yeah.
to your quality of presence because I think that's really what the tech is picking up on is the more present we are, the more connected we are to the other intelligences as well. And so
Yeah.
that's when the synchronicities and things start to happen. So
Yeah.
presence, one of the things we want to do is we think we might be able to find a scale for presence in the data. And
Right.
that would enable us to give people feedback on their presence in the moment through, let's say,
Yeah.
a little light that would glow more brightly the more present you are, and dim down the less present you are, and those kind of things.
Right. And I had kind of assumed that presence and coherence in the field and the light would be going together. Are you suggesting that
Yes.
they might not?
No, 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 no. I think they are, but I think we're going to be able to see a scale
Okay.
of like how present somebody is, and be able to use that for feedback.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Um, now, you've founded the Science of Consciousness Conference. Is that right? That happens annually at Broughton Park. Do you
Yeah,
want to?
science and consciousness at the Broughton Sanctuary in Yorkshire. Yeah, this year it's the 26th, the 30th of October.
Right.
And we're collaborating with Sci Games this year. So Sci Games was an initiative that started last year in the US, which was kind of an Olympics of psychic powers, as it were, where people were competing to be the best at
Right.
doing various things like remote viewing or seeing with blindfolds on or psychokinesis, bending
Yeah.
spoons, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what we've always done with science and consciousness is that we've always had the academic and research side
Yeah.
combined with the experiential side. So it's a bit different to a traditional conference. There's up to 80 people can come. It's a 5-day kind of immersive process where you have both the research shared, but you also have the experience piece. So collaborating also with the Monroe Institute on that this year is one of the most established institutes in this area,
Right.
and looking at their sound science and how that might affect people's psychic skills. And it's just a beautiful location. It's right on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales on this lovely estate.
Okay.
So maybe I can give you the link that you can share in
Yes,
the
I was thinking just that, and people can go to the link and find out more about it.
yeah. I mean, they might have heard of it just makes me think they might have heard of telepathy tapes, which has been a very,
Yes, I
very
mean
popular
there's a lot.
podcast.
I see a lot going around about telepathy tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Diana Hennessy, who was the researcher behind the telepathy tapes originally, she's coming to Science and Consciousness and will be with us for the 5 days. So
Right.
that'll be great.
Right. Well, thank you, Peter, for this wonderful conversation. Highly pertinent in this context, in this moment, at this moment. And if I don't, there are a few lovely things which are kind of stand out for me in this, and it's leadership as an evolving capacity, something that's always changing. Leadership at the bow wave. The importance of the inner development is it's about alignment of who we are when we're leading, and the idea that future leadership isn't about control, but it's about um, kind of hosting the conditions for emergence, all of which feels very aligned with a sense, I think, of where we need to be going as leaders. So, to finish off, finally, um, there are two final questions, but the final question is really if you were to leave us with a practice or an orientation, what is important now, what would that be for a leader in a business under pressure, enormous challenges? What, given the work and understanding and insights that you have with what you've been doing, would you advise someone under a great deal of pressure to do?
Well, if they don't have any spiritual practice at all, I think the place always to start is a basic mindfulness practice. So just learning to sit and choose whatever tradition you want, but anything that just has you sit and learn to witness your mind. Because the moment that you do that, you witness like all the busyness in your head, you disidentify with the head, with the mind, as it were. So you realize I'm not all this busyness. I'm not all this chatter in my mind. I can't be because I'm witnessing it. So I must be more than it. And the moment that you create that space between yourself, capital S, and the mind, suddenly you get a lot less stressed. You can start to see things more clearly. You create space for the intuitive intelligence to come in. So, I think that remains. If you don't have a meditation or mindfulness practice, that remains the foundation. And then find ways, for your body to regenerate. So, is it walking in nature, which will get you back into a healthy state, something physical for your body as well, whether you're going to fitness, but what time in nature is the other, I think, really important
Wonderful.
piece.
Okay, and the final question then, where can people find out about you?
Oh,
Contact
well,
you
I'll send you some
and
links, but they can go to there's my website, which is just petermerry.org,
yeah,
and which has the information about the books on it and links to a blog that I've been running for about 20 years, so all sorts of different articles and things.
right,
And then for the consciousness technology, that's gowyrd.org
yeah,
with a Y. There you can find out also about the space and the location. The Science and Consciousness event is quite a long link, so I'll send that to you. And
okay,
then you mentioned Ubiquity University as well, which is really on the leading edge in terms of providing academic education in this area. It's just ubiquityuniversity.org. So those are the main pieces, yeah. And soon
brilliant.
we'll have wholeperformers.com, so watch out for that.
That as well, and I'll put a link in as well for where they can find the book as well, Evolutionary Leaders
Oh,
and
thank you.
your others. So, Peter, yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation. I hope we'll be able to do this again because your work is evolving all the time. So we must get you back and have an update, especially when the research that you've been doing recently in
Mm,
Amsterdam begins to show up its findings, because that's going to be really good. And
mm,
anybody out there listening, by the way, if anyone is interested in doing an experiment with some of these, with the Weirdoscope or the Wyrd Light, then do get in touch with me or with Peter, and let's try and see if we can put something together, because there are a number of different ways I can imagine these things happening, and all of them could be really
mm,
very, very interesting.
yeah.
So thank you, Peter, very much indeed for your time. Be
Thank you,
well.
Greg, for
Please,
asking the questions.
for your contribution. Your insights are brilliant. Take care. Well, I hope that you found this conversation with Peter Mary both fascinating and full of insights, relevant and helpful to you in your leadership practice. You can find the links that Peter talked about in the show notes below, and I do urge you to reach out and connect with him. If you're interested in experimenting with the Wyrd Light or the Weirdoscope, please reach out to Peter or myself, and let's see what we can do. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and if you haven't already done so, please subscribe, as this greatly encourages the algorithms to spread our conversations to a wider audience. And please also leave a comment and share what you're thinking. We love hearing from you as well. This is Metaconscious Leaders with me, Greg Suart. Until next time, be present, be well.